everyone. Lovely to see you. We're here today with Gemma Harris-Bodden, and I'm excited to have this conversation because I think we can get into a really good deep dive around some of this incredibly important work that we do. But let's start the way that we always start at Embodied Dialogues podcast and do a nice kind of practice to just bring everybody into a little slowing down, pausing kind of moment. Just taking a breath if that feels okay for you. And then just notice in your own body, in your own nervous system, and through the felt sense, how comfortable it would be for you to just slow things down and notice what's around you in your room. And then if it feels okay for you, you could soften your gaze. And if not, you can just listen and hear my voice. And then slowly bringing your attention somewhere down into the center of your body. And just being curious about where your attention lands in your body. And you might just want to put a gentle hand there. I can feel mine in my throat. And if you're new, especially to Embodied Dialogues podcast and to our wonderful polyvagal community and the focusing community, and there's lots of probably other communities here represented in the folks that are here. Just really feeling into that. Feeling into community. And something about this particular topic may have drawn you here. And just maybe notice that. I'm going to explore the world of trauma. We're going to explore the dorsal vagus today. And we're going to get to know Gemma. And then we'll have lots of time for interaction. For sharing ideas, asking questions, exploring edges, challenging. It's all welcomed in a safe enough space. So then we begin to just round this off inside. Feeling your feet on the floor. And slowly opening your eyes. And coming back to our wonderful group. And I want to thank Lisa Gleason, who's my person. Boy, has Lisa ever helped me to be here and to do what we do and to help with, particularly with the podcast, but so many things, the newsletter that you guys get, so many things. I really appreciate that. Yeah. So here's Gemma Harris-Bodden. And Gemma, you're here with us from the UK.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So we were just saying that you had found me because you did the Polyvagal certificate course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
the general one, the kind of flagship course for the
Yes. Yeah.
Institute.
Yeah,
And I teach a piece in there, a class on listening to the body on interoception. And then we found each other on LinkedIn.
we did. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. On the certificate, I think it was when you spoke about the trauma loop that really sort of resonated with me quite a lot. And in fact, the whole polyvagal frameworks was this new lens to start seeing some of the things that I've been doing professionally and personally as well. Um, yeah, it
yeah.
was great to connect with you after that.
So tell us something about I know you're a psychologist by training and
Yeah.
a social psychologist and not a psychotherapist,
No, I'm not. I'm a
but you're
coach.
a coach, which I find really interesting. I just did a live training here in Toronto with a group of coaches, and wow, I really enjoyed it. It was
Hmm.
great. I'd like to explore that a little bit more with you today. And then also, you use this term in the description of what we were going to do here about sudden realizations.
Yes.
So we want to get into that as well. Tell us where you're at right now. What's your edge? What are you exploring? I know you'd mentioned that seeing this new polyvagal lens was really giving you a kind maybe is a paradigm shift too strong a word or?
Maybe more of a kind of framework or a new lens to begin to integrate some of the bits that I'd already been doing or looking at, or some of my research that I did earlier on in my career. So I've been always been really interested in psychology, but I specialized in social psychology sort of through
Mm.
my research early on. But I was always really, really interested or fascinated with connection and belonging. So a lot of my work, even though it's sort of box and arrow, quite quantitative models, I was
Yeah.
really drawn to the idea of connection and belonging and how fundamental that is for people. So yeah, I was really drawn to that. And I think polyvagal theory just gave that new lens to kind of look at, well, what's going on with the nervous system within
Yeah.
maybe some of those social dynamics or those relational dynamics. It really knitted together really nicely with what I'd done and with the coaching. So that's something that I've trained in later in my career. Polyvagal theory, again, it's another lens, especially with that reconnection element when you think about people disconnecting from their body, their kind of inner experience, and that reconnection work through a polyvagal lens as well, I think is just really, really resonating.
So how is that kind of playing out in the work that you're doing? You've been doing research for, it sounds like a long time.
I don't do so much research now, so I was quite research heavy when I first started. Now I published a paper in November actually, but that was more of an opinion piece, and it was bringing essentially what we're talking about today, domestic
Yeah.
abuse and abusive relationship dynamics into coaching. And the reason
Ah,
that I sort of came back to publishing pieces with that one is because I really noticed coming into coaching that we didn't really talk about domestic abuse and these abusive dynamics very much at all. I can't remember when I came across Judith Herman's stage model and that idea of establishing safety. And it's only then that you get
yeah,
this remembering and mourning and processing essentially. And that comes maybe before the reconnection element. But I
yeah,
could really
yeah.
see how that was relevant to coaching as well and to elements of education, actually working in universities. You see that happen too for students when they leave an unsafe dynamic, come to university, and suddenly
Mm.
kind of
It blossoms.
floodgates open.
Yeah.
And that's where these sudden realizations are, looking at domestic abuse and the way that sometimes people can not see it. And we're probably getting into it in the conversation as to the reasons
Yeah.
why that potentially happens. But yeah, this idea of coming to a safer environment or a safe space, and that it's there that some people have that sudden realization. And it could be in coaching, it could be in therapy, it could be in education. We don't talk about it that much. Particular circles, we do, but it's good to be able to do these talks to bring more awareness and I think also more compassion to that process because it is a very painful one. It can
Yeah.
take people by surprise.
You're really focusing in on the what happens when a person is in an abusive relationship or has been in an abusive relationship and maybe still doesn't have those conditions of safety, but maybe isn't actively in but when those conditions of safety arise, that sudden realization, the waking up of, oh, where have I been? And
Yeah.
why didn't I see and feel where I've been?
Hmm.
I'm thinking of how powerful that can be when I've done these sessions when the non-protective parent
Hmm.
hasn't woken up, but the child has woken up as they've left the home.
Yeah.
And then the child comes back and says to the non-protective parent, the parent that is dissociating, why didn't you notice? Why didn't you realize? Why didn't you protect me? So there's a lot of complexity there. And
Absolutely.
that's what you mean by sudden realization.
And
Yeah.
then suddenly bubbling up, and that I think that
Yeah.
takes certain conditions for
Yeah.
people, and it's probably going to
Yeah.
be different for different individuals. But in terms of that kind of compassion piece of understanding why that kind
Mhm.
of process happens, I think that's what's really grabbed me over the last few years. There can be lots of reasons. Like you say, it's a really kind of complicated, it's almost a murky picture, that
Or,
not knowing and not seeing the
or
abuse.
knowing and not knowing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, where a
Yeah.
part of you
Lots of
knows
layers.
and another part doesn't know. The
Yeah,
world of dissociation, right?
absolutely. And I think there's lots of reasons why that happens for individuals, and there can be that overwhelm and that disconnection. But there are lots of other things that can come into play as well. And I think kind of widening out the conversations around that could be really useful for people in terms of that question of why didn't I see it? And actually, when you dig deeper into some of the processes there, it almost flips around. Like, why would you see it? It's
Yeah.
a very painful and sometimes dangerous thing
Yeah.
to acknowledge and recognize within those
Right.
dynamics. So for me, when I started taking another look at some of the research out there in things like social psychology and things like that, for me, there were lots of things that started to resonate differently. It's almost like we can psychologically and almost physiologically do these contortions and gymnastics in order to make it not so and to not see. So you have these things like, I think it's Freud talks about betrayal blindness, and
Yes.
her research.
Dr. Freud work. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
The trauma bonds, the betrayal bonds.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and the dependence. So if you're a child in those kinds of relationships, you're dependent potentially on the people around you, parents, etc. In a romantic relationship, in a marriage, sometimes there's elements of dependence there, especially with young families, emotional dependence too. The social psychology kind of side, if you dig deeper into that, there was a really key paper, I think it was in 1995, Baumeister and Leary, and they looked at the belongingness hypothesis and how fundamental belonging is to people. And it wasn't just in the kind of view where we seek belonging because otherwise we have these negative, maybe depression, loneliness. We have these experiences if we don't seek out belonging and social connection. It was also actually that kind of flip side mentioned in this paper where we avoid the dissolution of those social connections, of those attachments, even if they are not good for us, even if they are painful, even if they're abusive. So there were lots of themes in some of these really key social psychology papers that you could bring in to look at some of these sort of abusive dynamics and the understanding as to why individuals might not see it for quite a long
Mhm.
time. It can be a really long journey, actually, that
Yeah.
recognition, that acknowledgement.
Very, very long journey. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another layer to it as well with something like domestic abuse, where, I mean, if you think about interoception and that connection to the kind of bodily experience,
Yeah.
there might be a disconnection there because of that overwhelm and that threat that's present in the dynamic. But also, there is an element often with domestic abuse where there's almost an implicit or even a very explicit instruction within that relational dynamic to disconnect from that inner knowing, that inner experience. The kinds of things that people might be exposed to regularly, for example, might be comments like, well, you don't know what's good for you. I know what's good for you. or don't make a fuss, or along the gaslighting realms of, well, that didn't happen, you're just making it up, or don't be a drama queen. Constant messages to disconnect from what's the warning signals that might be going off within your nervous system. So there are lots of different layers there that we could sort of dive into more for each one, I guess, that feed into that not knowing and that suppression of that kind of inner awareness of perhaps what's going on in the relationship. And those kinds of things, yeah, really started jumping out to me over the last few years.
It's related to when women are accused of not telling anybody, not speaking up, not fighting back. And I'm reminded of a paper actually that Steve Porges wrote for The Guardian,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about how victims are blamed and how it's because we don't understand the dorsal vagal response, the dissociation, and literally either blocking the memory completely so that it actually didn't occur, it isn't
Mm-hmm.
processed in the brain, or just a real blocking of the intense feeling. And then people can talk about these things without any kind of interoceptive awareness of what's happening. So there's a knowing, but it's not connected to any kind of felt sensing. And
Mm-hmm.
we really see these different kinds of dissociation, right? And just how
Yeah.
incredibly important it is for us in the field to be talking about this
Yeah.
and educating people because it's still there all the time. You still hear it. Why didn't she say anything? How could a parent do that? We know a lot more now because of understanding polyvagal theory, how those
Mm-hmm.
things happen. And as you were saying about the sense of belonging, that we're wired to connect, we're wired to co regulate with other people. And so the threat is just too great.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
live in a misogynistic culture that tells women to obey, basically, that
Yeah.
they are in charge and our job is to obey. And so when you put all those things together, and as you also talked about poverty, I mean, it's not easy to leave a relationship when you're dependent on another person to be feeding you
Yeah.
and your children.
Yeah, like we said, complicated, messy, murky kind of situations and scenarios. I know women are more often the victim of domestic abuse, but just want to acknowledge as well, men can be too. Here in the UK, if children are witnessing domestic abuse within their family, they're considered victims of it, even if
Yeah,
they're physically.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
it's a very wide, murky, messy picture for people to unpick when they're within those dynamics. It can be really hard to see when people are in it.
I'm curious about the difference between coaching and psychotherapy. And this came up the other day too when I was working with coaches. I think we can become quite informed about how to work with people through the nervous system. And people are doing this now all over the place in so many different careers, right?
Yeah.
When you're aware of this, it starts to highlight it in the work that you do, right?
Yeah.
In your role as a coach, how do you work with domestic abuse in a polyvagal informed way?
Yes, yeah. So the women that I've worked with, and just, yeah, it's only women, have come to me often focused on something else within coaching, and then the domestic abuse history is disclosed. And so a lot of the work and the conversations that tend to come from the individuals that I've worked with that, and I'll add from my own personal experience with it, has been to work with that kind of disconnection, that the issues around interoception, the reconnection with that inner experience and the trust that goes with that inner experience. Some of that work might be around the sort of detection and the noticing of what's going on in the body. We might start
Yeah,
right down there because that's something that's been shut off from and numbed out from. So, for example, you might have people that are noticing that they haven't even detected some quite serious symptoms that they've had maybe with their health. They're shut off to the extent that they haven't felt the pain that they were in, things like that. Or people talking about being shut off from or feeling shut off from experiencing the brighter side of things as well, the kind of joyful side of things, because
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
just that dampening down of the negative affect, the positive
No,
affect gets
no.
dampened down too.
Everything
It's
gets
not,
flattened. Yeah.
yeah, it's not one or the other. So it's working around those kinds of things, getting in touch with the body. I loved on the polyvagal certificate the notice, name, and nurture. That exercise it was really beautiful. So I brought that into my practice. A lot of things are around noticing what's going on in the body and conversations around what fits for that individual in terms of trying to build on these things and enhances those things. I've delved into the research around interoception and I've looked, well, what's the evidence? What are the interventions there around interoception? There are lots. There are lots that tap into the breath work. There's obviously the heartbeat detection task. We could maybe focus on heartbeat. That one is not one for me. There's something that's not that engaging about one like that for me. But yeah, it's the conversations with my clients around what works for them. So it's what grabs them, what do they want to try, what do they want to see, and the space within the coaching sessions also just to tap into, well, how do you feel about that? Sometimes that conversation can stay quite detached and away from that inner sensing and that inner
Yeah.
knowing and bringing it back to, well, how do you feel? And often, again, coming back to those abusive dynamics, how you feel often has to be swept aside. That's not important, and it might even be sort of dangerous in terms of acknowledging some feelings that you have. So how an individual has felt has been very much pushed out of the picture and somewhere that we don't go, somewhere that we don't go within that dynamic. So it's bringing all of those kinds of conversations and that kind of looking inside again and trusting and valuing. A lot of the work is around those kinds of practices. There has been conversations around ancestry and what's happened in the past and things that involve that synchronicity
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
movement. And so drumming, singing, activities like that. Not in the sessions, but these will be things that the clients will be looking to add to their experiences that they bring in.
I like also very much Gabor Mate's his three words, authenticity versus attachment.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's so clever the way three little words sum up such a huge thing, a huge dynamic in a person's life, right? Is that how we sacrifice that authenticity, knowing and the seeing and the feeling, the full felt sense in the body of those experiences because of attachment, because of the fear of losing that attachment for so many different kinds of reasons, right, that we've touched on.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
how understandable that is. And at the
Mhm.
same time, how it makes you sick
Yeah,
physically. The body just is so struggling to hold in and down all of that authenticity.
yeah,
It's quite a journey, right? When we help people to start to connect in there and focusing goes so deep down in there when you start to see these shifts that happen with
yeah,
this beautiful opportunity that we have to reframe it, right? To make that fair paradigm shift to say, oh yeah, that's just how bodies survive. They numb things out and dissociate them.
yeah,
You're no
absolutely.
different than anybody else. That's what we're going to do when we have to do it.
It's a survival strategy and yeah, an understandable one.
Yeah,
One thing I wanted to ask you about actually is it's slightly heavy, which is why I thought I'd place it now because
yeah,
we started to mention
go
sort of
for
moving
it.
on to that beautiful kind of reconnection part of the journey. So maybe before we go there, I could ask you about this. So I read Resmaa Menakem's In My Grandmother's Hands years ago. There was something that really resonated with these kinds of dynamics and with polyvagal theory for me, because there's a lot of polyvagal kind of
Yeah.
framework.
The soul, what does he call it? The soul nerve, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Mm. And it was this idea of annihilate. So instead of fight or flight, he said it took it one step further. So just to clarify, the book, if anybody hasn't read it, is about sort of racialized trauma.
Mhm.
And so he talks about this nervous system state of annihilate and the concept of overkill, which often is very much present in domestic abuse, homicides, murders. That really grabbed me in terms of something that can transfer over to this kind of situation or this kind of dynamic. That again, it comes to that idea of course you would dissociate, of course you wouldn't see, of course you would adapt to survive that kind of situation, that kind of dynamic. If you're living with somebody that could, your neuroception, your nervous system is detecting, is not only able to shift into fight to fight you, but could also shift into a state where annihilate is on the cards as well. Of course, your nervous system is going to do everything it can to help you survive that. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about the annihilate kind of idea in polyvagal theory. And for me, it's only popped up there in my grandmother's hands. But yeah, I just wondered your opinion.
Yeah, annihilate is such a powerful word.
Yeah.
Wow. And, that would be an extreme part of the threat, right? That you would be annihilated by that person.
Yeah.
I think that's real. In my experience in started off doing work with assaulted women and then also with men over the years. But the first group I ran was for young women who were incest survivors. So, yeah, it felt absolutely like annihilation,
Yeah.
especially when that kind of assault happens when you're 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah.
It's a serious life threat. And so, of course, you don't remember it.
Hmm.
I remember women describing, that they would wake up in the morning and the same dad that assaulted them in the middle of the night was making them a milkshake for breakfast. How
Hmm.
does anybody, let alone a little kid, make sense out of that?
Yeah.
But the
That's
level of assault felt annihilating, like the threat of death.
yeah. So to make sense of that and adapt to that and survive that.
It's just not processed. And we know that those memories are often not processed fully in the brain anyway, because they're traumatic.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's what comes into the kind of interoception piece as well. Interoception is a sign of a coherent self.
integrated nervous system. Yeah.
But if you have all these memories that you've needed to shut off from and these experiences that you've shut off from, again, it's understandable
Yeah.
that there would be this kind of numbing out to experience these
Yeah.
problems with interoception.
In a BIPOC community too, the sense of being annihilated is very powerful. That white supremacy annihilates
Yeah.
through genocide. So it's a powerful word, and I think it's a good word to bring into the conversation because we can have conversations about this stuff up here, but we need to have conversations about this stuff down here and up
Mhm.
here so that we can go in and go to the level of depth that is
Yeah.
profound. I remember too this sudden realization, the most powerful one I ever saw was a young woman that was in my group who down the road, I think she was probably in her mid-20s, her sister decided to disclose about the stepfather, but she didn't decide to disclose. So she was still in that dissociated, encapsulated state, but the sister disclosed. And the sister's disclosing meant that she had to then be interviewed by the police
Mhm.
because the sister said, oh, this happened to her too. But she hadn't come to the place where she felt safe enough to disclose. She became psychotic
Mhm.
and she was admitted to hospital again. And we went through and then eventually she became more grounded with this kind of sudden realization. And the group that I was running, we all went to court with her. These things are really tough stuff. Like I can feel it in my body as I'm sharing it now.
Mhm.
Talk about sudden realizations. Somebody else says it, and then you could literally see her mind going kind of crazy.
Yeah.
with trying to kind of find those memories, that memory retrieval. And she did. But boy, oh boy, she wasn't ready for it. And this can happen too when kids go home to their parents and say, why didn't you protect me from mom? It can be mom. It's not always dad. Although, I mean, the stats are pretty clear about, and that too, it's like how men are socialized in our culture to numb out anyway.
Mhm.
And so we just have a lot of work to do, don't we?
Yeah, which is why, yeah, conversations like this just feel so valuable.
I know I'm feeling that right now too, really. And we don't have them enough. And
No.
they're not like exciting.
They're heavy, heavy.
Heavy. Yeah.
The sudden realization element is so important. If we have conversations, more conversations like this more widely, stretching it into domains like education and coaching, it puts this on people's radar that sometimes people aren't ready to look at these things. Sometimes people, when you least expect it, will have these sudden realizations. So yeah, really,
Yeah. And suddenly, just walking down the street and seeing something,
yeah,
the turn, the position of a body,
yeah,
the shape of a head, the expression will just trigger it. And
yeah.
then, boy, oh boy, we used to have this kind of saying in the feminist community, oh, bodies only kind of bring to the surface what you're ready for. But that's just not true. I mean, it's not true.
Yeah.
You're not always ready for it. It can just really slam you. And it's really on us, right? This is hard work that we do. I keep saying that to people. This work is hard work that we do, especially those of us who are brave enough to go deeply into the body about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where you have to go because that's where it is
Yeah. Yeah. And
rooted.
that reconnection, that identifying that and that reconnection is, I think we described it as a beautiful part of the process before. It's beautiful, but it's also really convoluted. So I know that in your book you talk about sort of brain plasticity and rewiring those kind of
Yeah,
connections.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's not a straight line part of the journey there either, even on that
Oh,
reconnection,
not at all. No.
backwards and
Yeah.
forwards.
In felt sensing and focusing, we have this beautiful way of blending those states, right? So there's in that third movement for I love that you brought up Judith Herman's three states, and I use it. It's in both of my books
Yeah.
because it's just so real, right? Establishing safety, remembering and mourning, and reconnection. And of course, they flow into each other. But that blending so that you can take the place where the body carries the wound and blend it with a place that is grounding in the body. They do that too in generative somatics a lot too. And probably in somatic experiencing too. But that's such a beautiful way that we have of helping that third stage to bring along what is still there that is difficult to be with in that kind of dorsal state and bring that nice ventral energy in there
Yeah.
to help it. Let's go to our folks now because I'm curious to see how our conversation is landing for people. I really appreciate this conversation, Gemma.
Me too. Thank
Hmm.
you.
And we really do need to do more of it. So we're coming back into gallery view. And hello, everybody. How is this all landing for folks?
So Eric had a question here. Establishing safety, remembering, and mourning. And he said, what was number 3?
Reconnection. Yeah. This is Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery. I just still keep using it because it's so perfect. Before that came out, we were all doing these groups for sexual abuse survivors, and it was not a good situation because we didn't have that first step of establishing safety down. And so some people were really being re-traumatized badly. And it was when Judith Herman came along and said, okay, everybody, we need to organize ourselves better here because bad things are happening and people are being re-traumatized. And it was quite revolutionary in the world of trauma at that point when she did that, when she wrote that book. It was a huge game changer in the work that we do, and a really important piece that was very polyvagal informed. Yeah. Hi, Eric.
Hi. Just on first establishing safety, that took me years. I realized I was getting there when I was pretending to forget whether my psychotherapist was a psychotherapist. I started calling her a physiotherapist. It was pretty hilarious. She knew I was horsing around and calling her a bad person because she was sort of nudging me towards going a little deeper. But it was all kind of guy comedy. Like when you're in enormous pain, you laugh, right?
Mhm.
That's just how it works. And she understood that. And she would be like, I'd be like, what was your thing again? Physiotherapy? And she said, oh, I don't know. Who knows? It was like, she'd sort of go along with this.
Ah,
Um, and I mean, it's actually still very moving for me even right now. So for her to read me correctly, that like where I come from, like you die before you cry, right?
you
That's,
suck it up.
oh, so even if it's like, even if you're in the zone, the way to communicate that you're in the zone is to pretend all you really want to do is talk about the Habs in the playoffs or something, right? And so she knows when Eric starts talking about hockey, that's when he knows he's in a bit, that's when he's in a lot of pain, right?
Yeah.
So she has a feel. So that took years.
Mm.
So anyway, so yeah, stage one, it's like,
Yeah.
I didn't even realize I'd been in it until I was beyond it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
so those
Thanks,
are my
Eric.
thoughts for the moment.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Robert?
So I have a thought inspired by the idea of annihilation. There are developmental levels. One that we're familiar with in addiction is the I am bad experience. And the truth is, we're not bad, but the essential pain is I'm not perfect. And that allows me to be authentic in some way. But prior to that is the level of existence. And we're treated as if we don't exist. We do exist, but the essential pain, which I think is maybe impossible for children and people who never have known safety, is that I am alone. I'm just wondering if that resonates or lands.
Say more, Robert.
Yeah, this is the work of Laurel Mellon. She has these different developmental levels, and the learned experience often is that we don't exist. We're treated as if we don't exist. And it seems to me that would be the experience of annihilation. Your very existence is not recognized.
Yeah.
The truth is we do exist, but there's a pain and not in the face of that treatment, just how utterly alone we are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I,
and yes, please.
I was just going to say the way that's landing for me and what it's brought up is a lot of the research around ostracism and
Oh,
the idea of yeah, potentially being cut off, treated as if we don't exist, and the threat of that being there. And so that's immediately what came to my mind as you described that, which obviously is a massive threat for an individual. So that definitely sprung up, I think, alongside the idea of annihilation,
yeah.
maybe more so than the annihilation for me, that threat of ostracism, the threat of being treated as if you don't exist, the threat of being cast out as if you
Yeah,
were
Excluded.
gone.
yeah. In more primitive society, it was being shunned, it was being exiled because there was no
Yeah.
life outside the tribe. That was the ultimate. Yeah. And in her work, she says if we can actually find enough support to accept how alone we were and maybe how alone we are, then sanctuary, the experience of sanctuary, when you realize the cavalry is not coming and you're really on your own, then you can have this relationship between your aware self and your bodily self, and that you can be here for you,
Mhm.
maybe in a way that no one else can be.
That's an interesting idea when you think about co-regulation. I wonder what Steve would say about that. I
Yeah,
can be here for me in a way that if nobody else is here for me. But
right.
it doesn't have to be a person, because in situations like that, people will co-regulate with the land, with their
Yes,
pets,
yes.
the lakes, with the rivers. Indigenous people do this because this is what they needed to do, right?
Yeah. And it's a great resource for
Exactly.
anyone.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think pretty much Steve would say actually, in order to be there for yourself, self-regulation, you have to have the experience of co-regulation.
Yeah, you have to have had the portal. He loves that word. The portal has to have been.
And and people in recovery talk about, well, no one was there for my family, but there were these cookie people, there were these families of friends, or what you got enough
Yeah.
experience. Oh, the people actually are safe to keep faith
Or
alive.
or a
Yes.
teacher or a doctor. Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
Hi, nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, you too.
Gosh, Jan, I have been searching for authors and thought leaders on trauma and addiction, and I can't believe it took me this long to find you.
Oh, well, you're here now.
I know. It was
Yeah.
like Gabor Mate and like 7 years ago,
Yeah.
and then Tian Dayton.
Yeah, I love Kiana. I met her just recently at the Friendly Circle
Yeah,
Berlin. Do you know the Friendly Circle Berlin group?
I just learned about it through your organization. I've been around the recovery world for almost 40 years. And one of the things that I didn't know I had trauma till I was 57, which was like 8 years ago after reading Body Keeps the Score, because it was not physical or sexual abuse. It was crazy mom raging at dad, drunk for many, many years. And so once I like really got the impact of how, oh my God, like learning that my addiction history and my severe obesity history was a direct result of what happened to me. It was like such a relief and so de-shaming, which was fabulous. And then the safety thing. So I remember just before this whole thing, noticing that it was really hard for me to maintain long-term friendships. And I would have romantic relationships for maybe 5, 7, 8 years. And I've had my nose to the ground on personal growth for years. I'm a coach and all of this. So anyway, I didn't realize until after reading Body Keeps the Score that I had a worldview that people just are not safe. I didn't even know that, even after all this work I've done. And it was because, like, well, yeah, I mean, your mom was not safe. You were bullied at school for being overweight. You're a lesbian, so you're not safe in the culture. And so it really informed me how I walked through life in this hypervigilant mode. And anyway, and then this is why I'm so thrilled to find you and your team. The shame over having a substance use disorder, having any kind of addiction, whether you're in recovery or not. I mean, like I was in recovery for years, but had so much shame about the fact that I even struggled that I was like in the closet about it. So I love what you're doing here about raising, maybe just shifting the paradigm on addiction. And anyway, I'm just really thrilled to be part of this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Friendly Circle Berlin is just such a wonderful group. Do you know them, Gemma?
No, I don't, but I shall be
Yeah.
looking it up straight afterwards.
Oh, Patrick McTeer, people are really excited by understanding addiction through the polyvagal lens. They had a conference that I spoke at in Dublin, and it was wonderful. It was at Trinity College, and Tian Dayton was there, and that's where I met her. So she'll be with us. Lisa, I think, is it January or February?
Yeah, January, February. Can't remember. I can look it up, but she will
Yeah.
be there.
Yeah, yeah. So her work, she's a real iconic person in the field. She wrote Trauma and Addiction years ago. I don't know how many years ago that book came out, but really trying to bring together these two fields that have been so separate. When we talk about sudden realizations, I mean, the role of addiction is so huge in that, because addiction really helps us to keep it all down in order to survive, right? And when you start really feeling into that, those addictive processes start to really loosen and change. The field, I think, is really changing over the years in a really good way. Trauma is coming into the addiction world, and the addiction world is coming more into the trauma world.
One of the things that I wanted to add around those sudden realizations, and I think what you were saying about addiction and the trauma loop and things, was just reminding me of a social aspect of disconnecting, even in how we talk about, not just how we think about, but how we talk about our experiences. So I know Gendlin has is it the experiencing scale? And that really nicely shows how people
Oh, I love it.
talk about their experiences at quite a
Yeah.
detached level versus
Yeah.
sort of working your way down to getting in
Level
touch with
7.
underlying meanings. But yeah, what really struck me about that was the social element of that. It's not just perhaps that individual. You could look at it as the individual in therapy or in conversation, but actually, again, the social processes, that threat of ostracism, that annihilation mode that might be lurking there in the background, affecting the conversations that people have in those relationships, in their upbringing within their family, even in the conversations they're staying in those more detached, kind of superficial levels of experiencing in the conversation as well.
Yeah.
So again, not surprising that it can take decades to get back in touch and get curious about what's going on underneath.
We see that on a societal level too, right? A cultural level, but there's real ambivalence.
Yeah.
You know, there's still a lot of messaging culturally about not speaking about it.
Yeah.
But there is also this stream where you see there are certain factions in the culture where it is really surfacing this need to address. We're still very deeply ambivalent about all that. You see it a lot in our training as a social worker, where social workers were really seen as baby snatchers. Because here we were daring to go into the sanctity of the family, where government was intruding into the privacy of the family and saying, you can't do that. And the ambivalence around folks whose job that is, it's still very much there.
Yeah.
I think it really tells you a lot about a culture. Here we are expecting people to talk about these things when we don't live in an environment where it's even welcome to do that.
Right.
So why would we do it? And then we're blamed for not doing it.
Yeah.
So it's a real double bind that people are in,
Yeah. Absolutely.
which is you think about the word, I'm just remembering, Gendlin, you think about the word double bind. And, he would often say, let's take a word and bring it down into the body. Imagine bringing the word double bind into the body. I mean, I think that is how it feels, right?
Yeah.
So why would you have a sudden realization?
Yeah.
And yet, Jenlin would also say that would come because life wants to live.
Yeah.
And, that's where I think Jenlin and Porges, their work in many ways goes together, but in particularly that idea that what's under this is that ventral vagal health, growth, and restoration. Or as Jenlin would say, that this carrying forward of this life process that is in everybody.
Yeah.
That we have to be, we need to tap into. But
Yeah.
boy, when it comes, it can be really overwhelming, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. The rug being pulled out, definitely.
Yeah. This has been a really very important conversation.
Yeah, it's
And
been
I
great.
really thank you for coming and being with us. And I'm really glad that it will go out into the world.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, because these conversations need to go out into the world. And I love your term, sudden realizations. Boy, I wish you would write a book called that.
Oh, thank you. I am in the process of
Serious. Like,
writing a
I'd
book.
buy that book, like there's a whole field in there, right, of study. And
Yeah,
it's a really great term because it's a point in the process of experiencing that is really key to train our people to know how to be with.
Yeah.
If you know how to help someone with that moment of sudden experiencing, you got it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whether you're
Yeah.
a coach or a therapist or a mother or a father or a piano teacher, whatever it is, it's like,
Mhm.
yeah.
And
Well,
for the people feeling like they're in that reconnection stage with the client or somebody, and oh yeah, we're here. And then suddenly like, oh, now I recognize what this is.
yeah,
And
exactly.
seeing that there's that sudden realization, yeah, coming up. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gemma. And thank you everybody for being here. Yeah. Bye. Bye, everybody.